And 7.5 is all about percents. Okay, so not a new concept, okay? So let's talk about percents. Let's talk about the actual word, percent. Anybody know what the word percent means? Yep. Out of 100. Very good. Percent means per 100 or out of 100 or divided by 100, but it's a number out of 100. Okay, so one of the big things we're going to do today is we're going to take a percent and turn it into a fraction. And that's pretty easy to do because the definition or what percent means tells me how to do that. So if I want to express a percent as a fraction, you're going to take that percent and write it over 100. And then, of course, we're going to simplify. Okay, so we'll do a few of these. We want to write as a fraction in simplest form. My handwriting's not the best today. You guys are going to have to bear with it. Sorry. So write it, that says write as a fraction in simplest form. That's pretty bad. Sorry, guys. Okay. I'll do better, I promise. Okay. Number 1, I want to write 95% as a fraction. Okay, so 95%, that means 95 per 100, or 95 out of 100. That's exactly what 95% means. So I'm looking at the fraction 95 over 100. What do 95 and 100 have in common? A 5. So when I divide out of 5, I get 19 over 20. Okay, what about 180%? Okay, once again, 180% means 180 per 100, or 180 out of 100. So 180 and 100, we could divide out of 10 right away. Just cross off some zeros. I'm left with 18 over 10, which both have a 2 in common. And I get 9 over 5. And for today, if you really want to write your answers as mixed numbers, you can today because we're not talking about a ratio. We're just talking about numbers. So you could say 9/5 or you could say 1 4/5. For today, those would all be accepted. Okay? Questions so far? Not new information, hopefully. Okay, number 3. These ones will be a little different. I want to write 67.5% as a fraction. Okay, so I'm going to show you 2 ways to do this. One of the ways is easier, but it doesn't work for every single percent to a fraction. So I'll show you the easy way. Hopefully it'll work for most of them, but there's some special percents that it won't work for. So for this one, 67.5%, I want to be able to write this a different way. So 67.5, what's another way we could write 67.5? 67.5. Okay, 67.5. Okay, still a percent, but we just wrote it as a decimal. And now if I took that and put that over 100, I would have 67.5 over 100. Okay, but there's a problem with that. Why can I not accept 67.5 over 100? What's wrong with that answer?
You can't have a decimal and a fraction.
Very good. I can't have that decimal. I can't have a decimal and a fraction. That just doesn't work. So to get rid of that decimal, what I really need to do is move it one place to the right, and then I wouldn't have a decimal, right? What are we actually doing when we take a decimal and move it one place to the right?
Multiplying by 10.
Good, multiplying by 10. So what we're going to do is we're going to multiply by 10 because that lets me change that 67.5 into a 675. But I can't just multiply the numerator by 10 because that changes the fraction. So how would I compensate for that? Multiply the denominator by 10. So now I have 675 over 1,000, okay? And then we could go through and divide this out, and so for consideration of time, we can divide out of 25, and I get 27 over 40. Okay, so this is one way. If you have a percent that's a fraction, change it to a decimal and then put it over 100 and then simplify from there. Now, here's the thing. Not all decimals not all fractions turn into a nice easy decimal, right? Sometimes we have repeating decimals, right? And if I try to put a repeating decimal in the numerator or denominator and multiply by some power of 10, no power of 10 is ever going to get rid of that repeating decimal, right? Because it's still going to keep going and going and going. So if you have a repeating decimal, you can't use this method because it's not going to work. Okay, so let's look at a different way. We're going to write 67.5% as a fraction using a different method. So percent means per 100 means out of 100. Or isn't that the same thing as divided by 100? Right? If I tried to say 67.5 over 100, that's what we would do. It kind of looks funny because I have a fraction in the numerator. But what this actually means is 67.5 divided by 100. Right? That's what a fraction means. Okay, but then again, there's a couple things wrong with this picture. First of all, I can't multiply or divide mixed numbers. So what will I do with that 67.5? Okay, I need to change it to an improper fraction. So 2 times 67 gives me 134. And then I would add 1 to get 135. We keep the denominator. So instead of 67.5, I now have 135 over 2. And then once again, think about all of our operations with fractions. We usually don't divide. What do we do instead of dividing? Multiply by the reciprocal. So we're going to take 135 over 2 times 100. Okay, and from here you could multiply across, or we could reduce, right? I could divide out a 5 from both of those. The 100 turns into a 20, and the 135 turns into 27. And now if I multiply across, 27 times 1 gives me 27. 2 times 20 gives me 40. And if you look back up at your original answer, that's the same thing. Okay, so the first way I think is a lot easier, which is why I showed you guys that first. But if you have a repeating decimal, it's not going to work. So if you have a repeating decimal, you're going to have to divide by 100, which means you'll multiply by 1 over 100. Okay, make sense? Okay, let's do one more of the decimals, and then we'll move on to the next concept. Let's write 3/4% as a fraction. 3/4% as a fraction. Okay, so if we have a nice easy decimal, it's easy to use that. Do I know what the decimal equivalent of 3/4 is? Very good, 0.75. Once again, this is still a percent. It's still 0.75% or 75 hundredths. So now I'm going to take 75 hundredths over 100. Okay, once again, I can't have a decimal in my fraction. Multiplying by 10 isn't going to do the trick because I'll still have a decimal. So what do I have to multiply by? 100, where you need to move it twice. So we're going to multiply the numerator and denominator by 100. So now I have 75 over 10,000. And when we go to reduce that, we can divide out a 25 from the numerator and denominator, and we should end up with 3 over 400. Okay, any questions about going from percent to fraction? Stuff we've hopefully all done before, maybe a long time ago. Okay, another thing we're going to do today is kind of a different type of percent problems. Sometimes we're given these word problems and we're asked to find certain things. And something that is very, very helpful for these types of problems is what we call the percent proportion, which may not sound familiar, but I bet once I write what this percent proportion is, you guys will be like, oh, I remember that. Okay, the percent proportion says I have is over of equals percent over 100. Sound familiar to anybody? Anybody ever use this? No? Never? Okay. Is over of equals percent over 100. Now, sometimes with some of the word problems, it's going to be more helpful to think about the is as the part and the of as the whole. May not use that information today, but tomorrow, whenever we're looking at the word problems, we have part over whole equals percent over 100. It means the same thing. Is over of equals percent over 100. Okay, so we're going to look at some problems. And we're going to have to fill in these gaps. And whenever we fill in these gaps, one of these gaps is not going to be filled in. So we're going to have a proportion that we'll have to solve. Okay, so let's try one. I want to find 15% of 180 is what number? Okay, so for those who've never used the percent proportion before, what I like to do is I like to go ahead and set up my empty proportions, okay? There's one thing that will always be the same, and it's this right here. You're always going to have that 100 on the right-hand side, okay? Now, another thing that's always going to stay consistent, and it is the easiest blank to fill in, is what goes over 100, okay? Because the only thing that will ever go over 100 is a percent. In the percent proportion, the only thing will be a percent. So if you're reading through your problem, and you're given a percent, that's really easy to fill in. For this problem, if I see 15%, I know I'm going to put 15 over 100. Yes?
Can you put that in an equation form?
You can. You can put it in equation form. So you could translate it directly to an equation. That works too. I think that's how your book explains it. I prefer the proportion, which is why I'm teaching you guys that this way. But if you prefer translating this into an equation, that would be acceptable as well, okay? All right, so we're going to put the 15 over 100 because it's 15%. Once again, if you don't see a percent, you're not going to put over 100. That's the only thing that will ever go over 100. Okay, so now we've got to figure out whether we have an is or an of. Okay, so if we read through the problem, a lot of times it kind of just tells you what it is. So 15% of 180. Okay, so 180 is going to be my of, so I'm going to put 180 in my numerator, which means I'm trying to solve for that numerator there. Okay, and then once you have your proportions set up, you can use your cross products. So 180 times 15 would give me 2,700. 100 times x gives me 100x. Solve for x, divide both sides by 100, we would get 27. Okay, questions so far? Okay, let's try another one of these. What percent of 60 is 150? What percent of 60 is 150? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and set up my empty proportion. Go ahead and fill in the 100. Okay, I said the easiest thing to fill in is that number over 100 because it's always going to be a percent. If I read through my problem, am I given a number for a percent? No, I'm not. That's what I'm looking for, right? What percent? So my variable is going to be the x over 100, okay? And now to fill in the other two, remember we have is over of. So if I read through my problem, I have what percent of 60 is 150. So we're going to put the 150 in the numerator and the 60 in the denominator. And if I cross multiply, I would have 60x. And then my other one would be 15,000. Divide both sides by 60. And 15,000 divided by 60 should give you 250. Okay, but before I move on, what kind of answer was I looking for? A percent. So you have to make sure you put that percent because 250 and 250% are not the same number. Okay, so you have to make sure you put that percent sign. Okay, let's try one more of these. I'll have you guys try this one on your own. Let's try 18 is 9 percent of what number? Okay, hopefully we set up our proportion 18 over x equals 9 over 100. Set up your cross products and we end up with 1800 over 9, which is 200. Very good, very good. Okay, are there questions over the percent proportion? I know we're kind of going through this quickly, so if I'm going too fast, please ask questions, tell me slow down. Moving on. All right. We have one more concept. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff, and there's still more that we have to learn tomorrow. It's just a lot of things kind of thrown together. And this kind of isn't new because we're just going to be solving some equations. But these equations, we're going to look at maybe an easier way we can solve them now that we were kind of talking about some of these things. So the equations will look like 2 and 8/10 x equals 12 and 6/10 plus 7/10 x. Okay, so not awful, right? Not too bad. We could go through and solve that using the decimals, right? It wouldn't be too bad. Maybe you have to do a little bit of thinking. It would be nice if they weren't decimals, right? Okay, but think back to the very first problems that we did. If I had a decimal in my fraction and I wanted to get rid of it, how do we get rid of that decimal? Times by power of 10, right? How many ever decimal places you got rid of, that's the power of 10 you multiplied by. If you needed to get rid of one decimal place, you multiply by 10. If you need to get rid of 2 decimal places, you multiply by 100. So if I look at this problem, what power of 10 would I have to multiply by? Just 10, right? Because there's only one decimal place. So if I multiply both sides by 10, I get to move all of my decimals one place to the right. So now I have 28x, 126, and 7x. And this is a much nicer equation to solve. So if I look to get my x's on the same side of the equal sign, I have 21x equals 126. Divide both sides by 21. We should get 6. Ends up being 6. Okay, so I know that's not the only way we can solve those equations. You could solve it with the decimals, but decimal multiplication, decimal division, addition, subtraction is a lot harder than just whole numbers, right? Okay, so I'm going to give you guys last problem. I want you guys to try this one on your own. Try 41 equals 75 hundredths y plus 1 and 3/10 y.